what you just got as a message from Robert Bateman was a tour de force. It was so rare to get a lesson that starts with early human beings and drawing on the caves in the Paleolithic era, and then we learned agriculture. And I was sitting there listening, and I was thinking, okay, maybe what I should do is start earlier. So I decided just to give us a frame of reference for our whole lives on planet Earth. And since I'm holding this, don't bother with that. If you consider the planet and the moment when life began, not human life, but life, that takes us back, and this is in the era of now we're moving out of human history. Let's move to cosmology, planetary life, the life of this beautiful rock that we live on in a certain solar system, and we're the only, I always liked that TV show, Third Rock from the Sun, and that's what we are. We're the third rock from the sun, but as you know, we're the only one that looks like this, that's blue and green and sustains life. So if you try to imagine that 3.8 billion year stretch of time from when life first began on the planet, and put it on a timeline, let's imagine it's 1 kilometer long. Okay, so that's the whole time of life on planet Earth. Then I don't know how many of you could even begin to imagine when humanity made our first appearance. When did we step out on the stage and decree that we were the top species? Well, we didn't decree it the minute we stepped out on stage. We didn't know that yet. We told ourselves that later when our brain got bigger. But in a 1 kilometer long timeline, humanity emerges in the last 2 centimeters. Okay? Now we start thinking, okay, so when was the Industrial Revolution? That era when Robert's mom was born, 1900. Well, the Industrial Revolution, we usually started from about 1870, around there. That was in the last 8/1000ths of a centimeter on a 1 kilometer long timeline. And in that flash of time, that blink of an eye in cosmic terms, we've become the dominant force on this planet. What we are doing is changing and has already changed the chemistry of the atmosphere, has already doomed species to extinction. I mean, the last big extinction event was the one that took out the dinosaurs. And contrary to at least the belief of some members of Parliament, humans weren't around then. You know, I once at Stockwell Day is very funny, actually. He once did a comedy skit on himself in which, for those of you who don't remember Stockwell Day, he was once the leader of the Alliance Party, which morphed itself into the Conservative Party after it cannibalized, ate alive the Progressive Conservative Party, which is why it's now extinct. But Stockwell Day once said, I actually do know that the Flintstones is not a documentary. So, you know, he does know it. But when that last extinction event that took out the dinosaurs, human activity is now precipitating an extinction event on that scale. So there's some very pressing issues that we should be talking about in our society. And top of the list has to be survival. I mean, what could be more important than that? One of the things I quoted the other day in the House of Commons was a former senior economist to the World Bank. I like it when I can quote economists. There are some great quotes from economists you heard this morning from E.F. Schumacher, who was also one of my heroes. As a matter of fact, the Green Party started out in 1980 as the small party, small s, small p, because we all decided to run for Parliament in order to talk about environmental issues, which no one was talking about in the 1980 election. And since we didn't have in those days computers or email or any way to really talk to each other except for me running up my phone bill, that was actually a very good environmental investment I made. I made so many phone calls to organize candidates to run for what we called the small party, small s, small p, because we decided to base it on all the theories of E.F. Schumacher. We figured that would work as a kind of like a manifesto. Since we couldn't share documents online, we'd never heard of such a concept. It didn't exist. So we just grabbed E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, said we can call it the small party. And back to my phone bills, why that was a good thing. I had such a big phone bill when I finished organizing the first ever environmental party running in Canada, which we had 12 candidates in 6 provinces. Anyway, I had to sell my car. So that was a good thing, because that meant I didn't own a car between 1980 and 2007. I regard it as one of the great ironies of my life that when I became leader of the Green Party of Canada in 2006, within a year, I'd been talked into the fact that I needed to have a car. I didn't need one between 1980 and 2007. And may I suggest to all of you who haven't yet been convinced you need to buy a car, don't ever let anyone talk you into the idea that you need to own a car. I can't tell you how many great vacations I was able to have with the money I saved from not owning a car. So that's just a little bit of a side note there. So in all these years, so what we're doing to the planet is a serious problem. On the other hand, the good news is that while we're the single biggest force for change on the face of the planet, that means that the changes that are coming at us, climate change, ocean acidification, the horrible plastics that you saw in the oceans and in bobslides, the drift nets killing the dolphins and the albatross and the fish, back to the cod fishermen for Newfoundland, just because I'm from Atlantic Canada, I just stand up for the cod fishermen for a bit. It was actually, yes, the inshore cod fishermen used to wait for the cod to come into them, and they had cod traps. And that kind of fishing had been going on for 500 years. But it was the big trawlers, the offshore boats that were owned by two major corporations, National Sea Products and Fishery Products International. They didn't have $1 million boats. They had $100 million boats. They dragged their nets along the ocean floor as draggers. They had nets that could scoop up 2747 aircraft. And they had sonar and radar. They didn't wait for the fish to come inshore to come to them. They could hunt down every last cod, and they did. And some of those poor inshore guys actually went to court to try to get an environmental assessment on the quota that was given out by the federal government those days, because they said the cod are disappearing, the quota's too high, we have to reduce the legal amount of fish we're allowed to catch. The federal court threw it out. They said they had no jurisdiction to oversee the quota given out for cod. So here's the cod fishermen in the inshore, near shore. Even a $1 million boat was still staying pretty near shore. But they couldn't get anyone to listen to them because they were considered uneducated. And the DFO fishermen, there were, speaking of gagging scientists, there was a great fisheries and oceans scientist named Dr. Ransom Myers. And he actually had to quit working in DFO so that he could go public and say, we're wiping out this species. Now, this was a species of fish on which an enormous amount of the economy depended in Atlantic Canada. This should be a classic case. We should teach it in every classroom. Because when they shut down the cod fishery, and what the Newfoundland fishermen always said was, the government didn't declare the moratorium. Fisheries Products International and National Sea Products declared it when they said there was no fish left to catch. When there was nothing left to catch, then the government put in place a moratorium. And as one fisheries minister described it, we'd fished the North Atlantic cod to quote unquote commercial extinction. And it's still not recovered. But that action when they had to close down the cod fishery, that put 30,000 people out of work. If that had been a bank, we would have had an inquiry. They never had an inquiry into what happened because insiders within the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans knew what had happened. They had ignored the scientists, they'd shut down the ones they didn't like, and they had not listened to the poor inshore guys because the big multinationals that were doing what they called fishing effort, their fishing effort was better because they had sonar, radar, they had draggers along the ocean floor. It's like clear cutting in a forest, only right along the habitat for the fish and all the bycatch. Because when they yanked those nets to the surface, every single living thing in the nets died from the pressure of being yanked from the ground to the surface. So they were all dead when they got to the top. They couldn't be thrown overboard to live again. So the things we've done with our technology, destroying species, creating the climate crisis, and we have created the climate crisis. The good news out of all this is since we're the problem, the solution is within reach. Right? We have every single invention we need to live without fossil fuels. We have every single invention we need to protect the habitat for species. We have every single capability to make sure that no little child anywhere on this planet goes to bed hungry. And we have the ability to start planning for economies that don't run on boom and bust cycles that leave some people, you know, sort of like winning at a big casino and other people left to try to pick up the mess after them. We can actually do all these things. Nothing new needs to be invented. What we really need is to take control of the levers of power that are right now being exercised in this country by people who don't understand there's a problem. How many of you have studied climate science, the climate change, what it means, the basics of climate change? How many of you have talked about it in school, gotten any education on climate change? Okay. You already know more than most members of parliament. Huh? How many of you have studied anything about how we could go about making sure that people don't go hungry in the world? You already know more than most members of parliament. I work with the other members of parliament, and I have to say, I really want you to know this, they're very nice people. Well, 307 anyway. There's 308 altogether. And the outlier on my comment, it's not that I don't think Stephen Harper isn't nice. It's just that he's very antisocial, so I'll never know if he's nice. But the ones I've gotten to know are just normal. They're nice people, and they want to do the right thing. And Mr. Neufeld mentioned, over there, Neuf mentioned that I've started this all-party climate caucus. And the conservative who sits on that all-party climate caucus is just as committed as I am to making sure that the rest of Parliament understands climate science. We brought Andrew Weaver up, and he gave a great talk, including to some of the people who'd been saying crazy stuff, like they didn't think climate change was real, and maybe it was sunspots, and you know, that maybe a bunch of really conniving scientists made it up. We actually can reach these folks and get them to see that they must take action. The thing that we need to do, though, is not wait till all of you are 18, can vote and run for Parliament yourselves. What we need is a youth movement across Canada that simply does not allow the governance of our country to ignore the science that we understand. We can't allow the governance of the country continually to feed into the idea, and you heard it earlier, of I'll cut your taxes, you can get more stuff. We don't, you know, we'll lay off all the scientists that do work on ocean contaminants. They just did that last week. We're going to close down the Polar Arctic Research Station. It's called PEARL, Polar Environmental Arctic Research Lab. We're going to shut down the science that goes on at the Experimental Lakes area. This is the area where Dr. David Schindler, our leading water scientist for all of Canada, did most of his cutting-edge work. But 58 freshwater lakes have been set aside since the 1960s, so scientists can study with a solid baseline and know what difference does it make when you add phosphates, what happens with acid rain, what happens when you've got climate change, and study and inform and direct policymakers, which is what we sometimes call politicians, to understand the world around them. All right, they're killing all those jobs. They're selling off the Experimental Lakes area. They're shutting down the polar research. They're ending the program on contaminants. To me, it's kind of, the image that keeps coming to my mind is as if we're on the brink of this cliff, like we're stepping off and we're blind. And the science is our seeing eye dog. And we've decided can't afford that dog anymore. We're just going to, you know, the action that Bob did earlier of this, you know, hear no, speak no science, see no science, hear no science, see no evidence, hear no evidence, speak no evidence. Because we, for some reason at the moment, are living in an oligarchy. It's not quite a democracy anymore when the only thing that our Prime Minister cares about is getting more oil out of the ground. From the oil sands, from the Beaufort Sea and the Arctic. Now we've opened up licenses on the Beaufort Sea. From the East Coast to the West Coast, tankers, oil, pipelines. We all need oil, we know that, but we can plan to phase it out. And as I said, we don't have to accept that. Youth, political, nonpartisan action, youth action can change Canada. It's a simple formula. You can change Canada. You can change the world. And that's not just something I'm saying because I'm in a room full of young people. It's what I actually believe. And I know it can happen because those of us my age, Bob's age, those of us that are already grandparents, know that we cannot leave you in the mess we've created. So we want to work with you, but we also know that when young people speak, it commands attention because you've got the inheritance of either the good things we do or the bad things we do. The solutions are there. Never despair. Never despair. The solutions exist. We need to work together, and your voices in letters to the editors of newspapers, in social media, in gatherings, in rallies, in school, at home, wherever you are, however you speak out, on Facebook, but also write to letters to the editor of the newspapers and say a couple of things right now. We're facing an omnibus budget bill that destroys environmental assessment, destroys protection of fish habitat, creates a whole new scheme that allows the National Energy Board to have the power to destroy endangered species if they're on a pipeline route, or to ignore navigable waters. There are members of Parliament right across this country, and some of you who live up island, you probably have a Conservative member of Parliament. They need to hear from you. And for the rest of you, if you have Denise Savoy or me or Randall Garrison or some of the opposition MPs who are already working against this legislation, write letters to the editor, the Globe and Mail, the National Post, the Vancouver Sun, the Victoria Times Colonist, and say, well, use your own words. Say, I understand that we have an economy. And I understand because I want to get a job. I'm in school now, but I'm going to want to get a job. But I don't want to get a job today if it means I have no life tomorrow. Stand up and say it, because grown-ups, people my age, politicians, media, they'll pay attention because you have the right to demand your future. Thank you.